and they're not connected to the individual or the family. It's a layer between private concerns and public concerns. Maybe churches, maybe unions, maybe. Again, some people debate about that, but NGOs, NPOs, things like that are part of civil society. You know? So in any case, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just want to give you an idea of some important issues. And what McCargo, he's making, well, not him, somebody else is making this claim that in Japan, their civil society is actually a little bit weak. Okay, that the government, that in other words, you have the state and you have society. When I say society, I mean the private individual. And the state can pretty much just come right in and do what it wants. Okay, and so state and society are sort of blurred. They're not separate. But in a healthy democracy, they're supposed to be separate. Public and private concerns are supposed to be segregated, right? But supposedly in Japan, that's not the case. Again, that's debatable. But in any case, and then related to this, there's this pattern pluralism. It means the integration of social groups into government. Social groups, again, could be any type of organization, not related to the government. Okay? But it's integrated. And this is true in Japan. To set up a lot of things, you have to get permission, not for everything, but many things. You have to get permission from the state to do a lot of things. Okay? And the state will monitor what you're doing. It gives the ministries something to do, it gives them a lot more power. Okay? It's not completely different in the U.S., but in the U.S. it's a little more freewheeling, right? Political parties which mediate between government entities. Well, in any case, I don't spend more time, but I just want to give you an idea, because later on in the course we'll actually revisit these issues. Okay? And then McCargo also talks about, on page 111, client-oriented politics. Client-oriented politics. And he gives some examples that I'm not going to talk about because that's your job to read those examples. But the reason why I draw your attention to it is because this relates to something we're going to talk about in a moment, which is exchange theory. And so you have the state and you have individuals, or the state, the companies, or other organizations, and how do they work, how do they negotiate, how do they exchange value between them? Yes?
To go back on topic, if according to the reading, legislators and businessmen tend to make a lot of the decisions. So if that's true, what's the argument for those two boundaries you mentioned to be separate? It sounds like it's very not separate, and there's no real civil society to speak of.
In the case of Japan?
Yeah.
Well, that's what a lot of people would say. That there is, that they do not have, it's not that they don't have a civil society, it's all relative. They don't have, some people would argue they don't have a very strong civil society. For example, the media and reporters. You see this in the United States too, actually. They basically work too close to the government. And but that's, in the case of Japan, they have something called kisha, press clubs. And they don't have that much autonomy. And so people would say, wait a minute, the media is not supposed to be an arm of the government. The media is not supposed to take its marching orders from the government. They're supposed to report on what's actually happening, whether the elites like it or not. But in some places, like Japan, I'm not saying Japan is completely anti-democratic, but in Japan, they have this tradition where politicians, for example, powerful people in the media cooperate. And so that's an example of how state and society is blurred. So there is, this civil society is not strong in the world of journalism in Japan. Not everybody would agree with that. There are many exceptions.
Yeah, is there an argument for civil society being stronger than what that?
In Japan?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, Japan is a very big, complex place. So if you go there, yes, you can find many examples of something that civic organization, civil society groupings. I'm not, we're speaking in a sort of an exaggerated way, of course, but just to make an argument, right? Just to highlight how Japan, what features define Japan compared to the United States, for example. Okay, I think you could make the argument civil society exists in Japan. It is a democracy, but it's a little bit shaky. Does that clarify?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, any other questions or comments? Sometimes these words, these terms sound a little bit vague and abstract. That's why it's very important to think of examples. So when you do the readings, be thinking about that. What does civil society mean? And then when you do the readings in McCargo or any of the other books, you come across something. In Japan, a good example of something that's like civil society, that maybe we have something like it. They're called neighborhood associations. Okay, we live in Japan. Not all places have it. And they're a little bit different, whether it's in urban or rural areas. But the idea is that, you're supposed to always be aware of what your neighbors are doing. So they'll pass around this big binder, and there'll be a notification in it or something, and you're supposed to sign off on it if you live in a building, for example. Neighborhood associations, they're called Chonaika. There's different names for them, and actually it goes back before the war when the state tried to organize society, tried to fragment and then reconstitute society into these little groups to give orders. It's easy to mobilize people. In the United States, we have something like that, certainly. Homeowners Association, that's, I'm sorry?
Neighborhood watch.
Neighborhood watch, right. That's not exactly, I mean, neighborhood watch is, that's related. Neighborhood watch is for one thing, to cut down on crime, but yeah, something like that. And it's not completely alien to Americans. But in Japan, this neighborhood association, they're sort of a multi-purpose task force, right? That's an example at the very, very micro local level of people coming together. And not, like I said, before the war, they were connected to the state, but after the war, in theory, they're not supposed to be connected to the state. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, like Winter Haven over there.
Like the what?
Like Winter Haven in north of town.
Uh-huh.
You have to sign all sorts of contracts before you buy into that neighborhood.
Okay. Well, yeah, well, that's true everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in Arizona, if you set up a new subdivision, that the people the construction people, it's, I think by law, I don't know whether it's Arizona or county law, you have to set up a homeowners association if it's new. For various reasons. It's getting more and more difficult to move to a place where they don't have homeowners associations. Homeowner associations actually are interesting legally because in some ways they can act like a private entity, and in other ways they act like a public entity. And they have companies now that manage homeowners associations based out in Colorado. For example, manage a community in Arizona. So when you have a problem, you got to call them. So when you get older and you can afford your own house, and move into a place, check out the homeowners association, because they do a lot of good, but people complain about it. Okay. Well, any other comments or questions before we go on? So also one of your readings, McCargo talks about Japan's external relations, page 180 to 208, and this is on, actually, by the way, McCargo has a chapter called Socialization and Civil Society. And he talks about civil society in kind of a very loose way. So yeah, on chapter 8, Japan's external relations. This is about, this is a poli-sci book. It's not an ANTH book. But I think it's very useful because many students, I think it's useful for two reasons. One, some students aren't that familiar with the basics of Japan as a social political entity. And so I think before you talk about what goes on at the local level, you should have an introduction to this. And the other reason it's good because it gives sort of a snapshot picture of Japan's macro political and economic institutions. But in any case, so yeah, it's not too much I want to say about this chapter actually, but it is important to get an idea of how international forces, with what we might call the super macro level, how international global forces configure or impinge, sometimes perhaps interfere or intervene with what's going on inside the national state, and how that trickles down all the different governmental bureaucratic layers and impacts the individual. And so that's why that chapter is not directly related to our more anthropological, ethnographic concerns, but I think it's important to know that type of information. Okay. So, any questions before we go on? Well, then there's just one more chapter I want to comment on, by Hamada. It's in Robertson's volume, page 125, and this is called. This has to do with the macro level. The anthropology of Japanese corporate management. Anthropologists can study anything, including companies. And she begins. She talks about in the very first chapter something called Japanese style of management. Is there such a thing? Going back as far as the 50s or 60s, but especially during the when it seemed as if Japan became an economic powerhouse in the 70s and 80s, a lot of Americans and some Europeans started to wonder, what is the secret to Japan's economic success? Maybe it has something to do with their corporate management style. So yeah, a lot of people looking at it. A lot of that, some of that writing is a little bit shaky actually for different reasons. But because some of it overlaps with this idea that there's some special culturalist principle to how Japanese behave socially, how they behave in organizations and companies. And once you understand that principle, that unlocks the secret to Japan's economic success. That's too simplistic. That borders on a type of mysticism, actually, right? But in any case, Hamada also talks about Nihonjinro, or theories about Japanese, and we talked about that at the beginning of this. So you can see there's sort of a linkage here, and how this idea that there's something special about the Japanese got wrapped up in researchers' attempts to understand how the Japanese were so successful economically. And he gives some background on that. And then he talks about groupism, right? Groupism. Supposedly, Japanese are very much into groupism, and this idea of the traditional household, and how because they have this legacy of the traditional household, or Japanese, i.e., that this has socialized them to function better when it comes to groups, when it comes to working in any type of collectivist entity, such as a company. And he gives what she's doing is she's sort of showing how this dichotomy has emerged between the Japanese versus Westerners. Right? Japanese versus Westerners. It's a very sloppy, lazy way of looking at things for different reasons. I mean, one reason is because, well, what's a Westerner? As I was telling my Japan pop culture class the other day, usually when Americans say Westerner, they just mean American. So they should say that. They shouldn't say Westerners. Doesn't mean anything. But in any case, on page 127, there's a chart called stereotypical binary comparison, or dichotomy. Stereotypical binary comparison of Western and Japanese management systems. Okay, and this should all be in quotations when you say the Western system versus the Japanese system. Okay, but this is a good example of culturalism we talked about at the beginning of the semester. Culturalism. This idea of trying to, forget about doing your homework and actually going to a factory and doing ethnographic work for 2-3 years and find out what's going on. No, that's too much work. It's too expensive. It's easier just to come up with these single key theories. Westerners are like this, the Japanese are like that. Right? Journalists have that luxury of writing and thinking that way because everything is in sound bites. But serious scholars, analysts, and undergrads should not have that luxury. Right? We want to be careful to avoid